Good evening. My name is Ken Yates, and I'm welcoming you to a town hall meeting where we're going to listen to each other's ideas about how to save 30 acres on the map, so that we can tell. It's right up the street here. It's on Claremont, on the left, across from Peachtree DeKalb Airport. This is the only topic on the agenda tonight. As far as what we're concerned with is to how to keep unnecessary development on this 30 acres of property. Tonight I ask you all to be very businesslike and extend all the courtesies that you'd want for yourself. Please remember this is a church, and hold all questions until the end. There will be a question period. And now we've had a change in our original agenda. I'm going to call on our County Commissioner for District 2, Jeff Rader, who will address us for about 5 minutes, and it will be on the topic of this green space. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks everybody for coming today. I'm Jeff Rader. I'm your DeKalb County Commissioner for District 2, which is one of the 5 primary districts in the county. You also have 2 super districts that cover half the county, but District 2 actually includes 3 of the 4 city council districts within Brookhaven. So I represent about 3/4 of the folks in Brookhaven. Now, this particular parcel is a piece of county property. Until very recently, it was the runway protection zone for runway 9-180, which was the crosswind runway at PDK Airport. It was part of the original airfield that was at Camp Gordon, where many Navy pilots were trained in World War II, and it was transferred as part of the devolution of that surplus airfield to DeKalb County that formed PDK Airport. About a year and a half ago, based upon advances in aviation, our aviation department were able to come to the conclusion that it was no longer necessary to have a crosswind runway, and so they applied to the Federal Aviation Administration to decommission that runway. And since that point, we have built hangars, both large box hangars and T-hangars, on the part of the runway that is between Claremont and the airfield proper. So we've added some there. It's not going to be used as a runway anymore, and therefore this particular piece of property, which was the runway protection zone, where no houses were allowed in case there was a failure in flight, this piece of property is no longer needed for airport purposes. However, it is still part of the airport footprint and part of the airport asset that is controlled and encumbered by FAA regulations as to the disposition of airport assets. It's a little bit different from the noise buyout lands that are off to not too far from here between Claremont and the airport, insofar as the FAA actually paid for those. Strictly speaking, the FAA didn't pay for this, and so we have no real pressure on us to dispose of the property or to redevelop it or anything like that. But if it does transfer, it needs to transfer at some approximation of fair market value, and it would, that money would have to be restricted and kept by the airport. Now, we have an example of a piece of property that has migrated out from under these FAA restrictions into public use as another public purpose on sort of catty corner across the airport in Chamblee, where we are putting the new animal shelter. So that is a piece of property that was part of a noise buyout. We made a contract with the airport and through the FAA in order to take that out of aviation use, and the county is paying for that land at a approved price over, I think, a 20-year period. So we're basically able to make the debt service on that transfer essentially part of our operating costs in order to get that. So that is an example of how we were able to transfer that out of aviation use without actually having to come up with a full purchase price all at one point. That's important because this particular piece of property, one of the things that obviously comes to people's minds is, well, we have these green space bond funds, why can't we use that to take the airport, to put in the airport account, and then we would be able to transfer it in that way? Well, unfortunately, our green space bonds are federal tax exempt bonds. Tax law does not allow the county basically taking money out of one account that has been funded with bond revenues and putting them into another account, because, and you can imagine why that is that it would just be a shell game. And I've had to go over this with on other pieces of property, but basically that type of a transaction, any transaction that we make with our green space funds has to be with another entity than DeKalb County. So that is a restriction. We could do it with another city or another jurisdiction, but we can't do it with the county. So there are a few restrictions, but having said that, obviously, as I mentioned, y'all are still county commission constituents, and we're very interested in what you want to do with that land. You've just passed a parks master plan, so that ideally would be a document that has some data and instruction. But as it relates to that, we're very interested in what you want to do.
We have an agenda.
No, I understand. Thank you.
For your speakers. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ken Yates, and I wanted to welcome you all this evening. What we have now is an opportunity for the organizers of this meeting. We call ourselves the North DeKalb Greenspace Alliance, and we were going to have some prepared statements. Some of the people that work very hard to put this together for us, for the people of DeKalb County. Before we begin that, however, I'd like to express our gratitude to the Claremont Baptist Church, the Reverend J.B. Brown, for providing these facilities, and they're nice facilities. Thank you very much. Before we start that, however, I want to make sure that everyone has filled out a card with their name if they wish to speak. If you wish to speak this evening, you must have a name on one of the 3x5 cards, and you will be given 1 minute to speak. If you have a question that you want to pose to us, if you'd write that question on a 3x5 card, hold it up and we'll gather those too. Okay? So those are the rules of engagement. Next, I want to recognize our neighbor who will speak first is Deborah Kidd, and she's going to speak on, let's see, what is your topic? Lost it. How to protect the green space. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Deborah Kidd, and it really warms my heart to see this many people turn out for this subject. It's very important to a lot of us. And I want to talk about DeKalb County taking responsibility for permanently protecting this 30 acres of land in Ashford Park. Since DeKalb County already owns the land, we believe it should be straightforward that for them to designate it as permanent passive green space. In July of 1981, I bought my house on 9th Street. My dad was in the Air Force, so I grew up around planes. And the sound of planes coming and going from PDK Airport was comforting to me. As time went by, the character of the airport has changed. It has grown larger. The hobby flyers are mostly gone and have been replaced with large corporate jets. Few of the people that use those jets live here in our neighborhood. The community is asking that this tract be protected by all jurisdictions. We believe that doing so in accordance with the Georgia Community Green Space Program is the easiest and best way to accomplish this. DeKalb County owns the land, and DeKalb County is responsible for figuring out how to make this happen. The Georgia State Green Space Law was created to preserve land where there is rapid growth and where dense development threatens to eliminate green space and open land. The program requires participating counties to set aside 20% of a county's geographic area as neighborhood accessible green space. The program provided grant money for land acquisition. However, DeKalb County already owns this 30 acres of land, Therefore, no funds need to be spent to acquire it. DeKalb County joined the state's Green Space program in recognition of its importance in the overall quality of life and the challenges facing urban communities to protect land from development. DeKalb County committed to protecting 22% of its land. We are in DeKalb County's District 2, which has only been able to spend about half of its available funds for this program due to few opportunities and the high cost of land. Again, this is land we already own, leaving funds for other parks and green spaces in the district. DeKalb County promised to aggressively pursue the creation of green space and would seek out conversion opportunities such as surplus county properties and obsolete or abandoned land. DeKalb County said this would include working with agencies such as the FAA, but instead they have used the FAA as an excuse to do nothing. DeKalb County pledged to further the goals of the Green Space program and identify methods to ensure that green space will remain forever. This is their chance to do it. On August 19th of 2013, I followed DeKalb County's established procedures and submitted nominations for this land to be inducted into the Green Space program. Mid-May of this year, DeKalb County denied the application. DeKalb County stated that this land cannot be inducted into the county's Green Space program because it's managed by PDK Airport or is subject to FAA regulations. There have been many excuses. Their denial did not mention their plans to sell the land. In 2011, PDK Airport Management began its efforts to close the crosswind runway, and they asked the FAA for permission to sell the land. Municipal airports conveyed from the federal government are bound by various obligations. The FAA will soon release the obligations on this tract of land. Because there are no FAA grants or federal money attached to this land, the FAA has said they will not force DeKalb County to sell the property. DeKalb County is not liable for repayment to the FAA for anything regarding this particular piece of former airport property. DeKalb County does not need to sell the 30 acres of land and forest to appease the FAA. Some people are saying that the land must remain as airport-compatible land and would have to be rezoned to remain green space. The FAA regards green space as completely compatible and useful as a buffer to residential neighborhoods. There is nothing in the Green Space program that requires rezoning. Since DeKalb County owns the land and PDK has said they no longer have a use for the land, there should be no barriers to the induction into the Green Space program. The community has been asking for this since 1996 and has been met with a continuous string of excuses for why it's impossible. It's time for DeKalb County to get this done. DeKalb has stated that protecting 22% of the geographic area is their goal, but they have not come close to achieving that here in District 2. Passive green space does not require any additional investment to develop park facilities. If we lose this land to development, it's a great community asset that will be lost forever. Old growth forests are priceless in an urban environment. We are asking DeKalb County to do what's necessary to permanently protect this land for the citizens of DeKalb, for our community, and for our children. Step up and do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I guess that made it fairly clear that we own the property. As DeKalb County residents, we already own it. Absolutely no money is involved here. We don't have to follow the money because there's no money to follow. It's a crucial effort to save this natural area from bulldozers. In return for nothing, we get everything. We get a forest, we get a meadow, we get wildlife, we get flowing streams. I think it's really important. I hope you do too. Our next speaker is going to be Mariana Yates, who just happens to be my wife, and she's going to talk about the value of green space to the community. Mariana?
Hello. As he said, my name is Mariana Yates. I live on 9th Street. And There are few places in North DeKalb with any natural area. The parks that are located in the North DeKalb region are pretty much developed out with recreational facilities and sports fields and all those sorts of things. This tract is one of the only places with substantial old-growth forest in this area. Leaving this land as passive green space provides North DeKalb with a completely natural haven for wonderful shaded walks, meadows to play in, and a stream to explore. Development of any kind, including recreational facilities, will scar this area irreparably. While it takes a few weeks to destroy a forest, it takes 100 years to grow one back, assuming you can even find a place for it to be. By any measure, North DeKalb would be considered completely developed out. There are just these few rare spots that are clinging to life by a thread. The value to the community is enormous. Natural areas provide an oasis from the daily grind and the stress of life in our busy world. I'm sure many of us, especially your children, are thrilled and fascinated when they have a brief glimpse of some of the native wildlife around here, be it birds, butterflies, turtles, rabbits, any of those things. All of these and more can be found on this property. Development of any level robs this wildlife of a place to be. If DeKalb and area cities continue down the path of mow everything down and build something, we will all have to live without ever seeing any wildlife in our neighborhoods again. And one of the best part of this is it costs virtually nothing. No one has to do anything to the land to make this happen. There's no land to buy, no expensive building, recreational facilities, or anything of that nature, saving your precious tax dollars for other needs, including maintenance and enhancements of the current parks and recreational facilities. This land was bought by our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, paid through their taxes. It belongs to the people of DeKalb County and is entrusted to our county officials to manage on our behalf. DeKalb County consists of more than 173,000 acres, and only 6,800 of it is in parks. Less than 600 of those acres are in North DeKalb. We don't have anything like the Davison-Arabia Nature Preserve. It's 2,200 acres in South DeKalb. We don't have any potential for anything of that size. I appeal to the county officials to save just this little 30-acre piece of land for the people of North DeKalb. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. I think we all know that once the trees are cut, once the place is paved, once the roofs are up and the runoff starts, it doesn't ever go back. This goes for things like parking lots and swimming pools and ball fields and tennis courts and all these things too. They chop down trees to make ball fields. They chop down trees to make tennis courts. This is not what we're talking about. This is permanent passive green space. It doesn't cost money. It doesn't have to be maintained. The trees do a wonderful job all on their own. Our next speaker is Catherine Bernard, and she's going to speak on government transparency for green space and the TADS program. Catherine, thank you very much for coming.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I know we all have other things to do on Thursday night, but this is so important to show our leaders that there are people who care about what happens to this green space, and more importantly, people who care about the process by what happens to this green space. Now, my husband and I bought our house here in 2011 in Ashford Park. To be frank with you, I first learned of this green space through Deborah Kidd and the other people working so hard on this committee, and I appreciate what they're doing unpaid to make sure that everyone in Brookhaven and the surrounding area knows what a gem we have in this green space. But the reason that I came to speak tonight is because we are facing a redevelopment powers law referendum on our ballot this fall that, if passed, would make it trivially easy for Brookhaven government to simply do whatever they want with this green space and not take any citizen input into account whatsoever. Many people don't even know that there is such a referendum on our ballot, or even if they have heard of it, what does the redevelopment powers law really mean? It's one of those laws that could mean anything. Well, unfortunately, I've studied it, and it's a law that means government can do whatever it wants. It can create tax allocation districts on Buford Highway or Peachtree or up at the perimeter, and within those tax allocation districts, all property tax increases are designated to go to pay off development in that area. Now, the process by which this development happens is completely non-transparent. Once these powers are conveyed to our city government, we can't take them back. At that point, they and the redevelopment authority control what happens to not only this green space, but everywhere else in Brookhaven that they would choose to designate as a tax allocation district. This means more taxes, more debt, more giveaways to politically connected developers rather than people who are being rewarded by the free market, and more power for the government to seize your property. Now, it sounds ridiculous that a piece of woods could be designated as a slum and seized by the city government, but it's happened before in Georgia. There is precedent, and it could happen again. Stockbridge is an example of where the Urban Redevelopment Powers Law, a component of the Redevelopment Powers Law, was used to seize property. The picture's gone, but beautiful property just like this, because it fit better into the city's redevelopment plan to sell it off to a private developer and make money that way. Other people have told you what a beautiful resource this is for our community and how important it is that we represent the will of Brookhaven citizens about what to do with this. I think there are probably more of us who would like to leave it the way it is rather than spend a bunch of money going into debt and then having to pay interest on the debt to some developer just so we can end up with another cookie cutter development on Claremont like so many others that have been contemplated around the metro area, one that we may not even be able to pay for when the interest comes due. So again, this is about the green space. This is about one specific resource that we have in here in our community that we should all educate ourselves on and make sure that our voices are heard with the City Council, with DeKalb County, that we want this to remain green space. But more importantly, we want to maintain a process in our community where all of our voices can be heard, where it's not any kind of top-down orders coming from whatever the City Council and their consultants have decided is the best plan for us. This is our property as citizens of Brookhaven, and we should be the one to determine what happens to it. So I urge you all, please educate yourself on the Redevelopment Powers Law. You can go to www.brookhavenreferendum.org for some more information. There should be flyers on your seat and available. And keep in mind that if this passes, we can guarantee that we will have more problems like this, more problems where the will of the people is not respected and we find ourselves with top-down development rather than having a voice in our own future. The green space doesn't need development. It needs the will of the people to come out and say what we want to do with it. So I ask you to vote no on the Redevelopment Powers Law in November for this green space and for every other part of Brookhaven that we need to develop as a community, not by top down. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. I hope everybody knows what a TAD is now. I didn't. Okay. All right, now that we all know what a TAD is, I'd like to talk to you just a tiny bit about the history. I'm not going to go through the full history that I had prepared, but for those people that lived in Brookhaven and in this area near Dresden, we used to call this area red dirt, and that's where kids used to play. And they've been playing over there since like 1949. They used to play in the woods, and I think that many people had their first home in this area, the little 1,000 square foot homes with the 2 bedrooms and the 1 bath. this is something that we'd really like to see to kept, is places for the kids to play in the woods. It's gotten to the point now where there isn't any place to play in the woods. Next on our agenda is Eddie Ellert, who is going to speak on the environmental impacts of green space. Eddie?
Evening, everybody. I'm Eddie Ehlert. I live at the corner of Duke and Duncan in Brookhaven. I moved to this neighborhood from Beaufort, Georgia in 1977 because I like the normal folks and the old growth trees that used to be everywhere around us. I want to speak to you this evening about some of those trees, some that might be our most important to everyone living west of Claremont. Here we're referring to it as green space, but I want to call it what it is, an eastern deciduous climax old growth forest. The area under discussion is what a forest is supposed to be. It's an interleaving of many native plants over the headwaters of 2 streams, including a certified wetland, and providing habitat for the many native animals that have been essentially undisturbed for a few generations. This area has gone undisturbed since the turn of the 20th century, and some of the trees within the boundaries have been standing since before the Civil War. It takes a very long time for a forest area to achieve the natural balance that is present in the Ashford Park Old Growth Forest. And it is among the last parcels in North DeKalb County to have managed to avoid rapacious development, the last of its kind just by being left alone. Yet, while being left alone, this forest has been working hard to provide free services to all of us. It shadows the noise of aircraft as they pass from one end of the runway to the other. Take a look at the valley that falls away from the forest and think of what the noise contour would be like if it was gone. It would be an unobstructed line to every residence downhill of Claremont. But noise isn't the only thing it reduces. By standing still and doing what trees do every day, it reduces emissions of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and oxides of nitrogen. And Peachtree DeKalb Airport is the second largest point source of those emissions in the entire state, second only to Hartsfield. Unfortunately, forests take land. The natural order of things on planet Earth is to allow trees the land they need to thrive. When they thrive, they provide those services for free. Land draws other interests as well. For reasons that take too long to explain, some are troubled by undisturbed land doing what nature requires. We live in an area that is stricken by an inadequacy of lots, streets, and houses, and all of the amenities required. That must be the case despite the highest density of occupation in my lifetime, or there wouldn't be a blind rush to mow down the forest and build more. This all rests on an invented concept of highest and best use. In the perennial interplay between government and developers, highest and best use has come to mean the most money I can make off of this piece of land, no matter who is harmed. Luckily, government does not require some consideration of who is harmed. Who is harmed is all of us. The simple fact is that even if every square foot of this property is sold for the highest price it can ever generate, it will not provide enough revenue to replace the services that the forest is already providing. The money cannot build a mechanical device to remediate the noise, the emissions, the storm runoff treatment that the forest goes about every day while just swaying in a breeze. There isn't a technology available to attend to the task, and if it were available, the cost would dwarf the budget of the city of Brookhaven. It's unfortunate that we even have to have this discussion. Before the Base Realignment and Closure Commission, the federal government would have automatically required an environmental assessment to determine the appropriate use for such a parcel. When the FAA found itself with thousands of square miles of decommissioned aviation facilities, the need to quicken the process of unloading properties required some simplification. The Ashford Park Old Growth Forest, unfortunately, gets folded into this simplification process. An assessment can still be requested, but is no longer a requirement. Nor is it in any way a requirement that the property be confiscated by the city from you to be consumed by developers. This is now and has been for generations public property. Despite oversight by the FAA, it has always belonged to DeKalb County citizens. No law requires anything about that ownership to change. This vestige of life before Georgians arrived will not slip away unless we sit back and let it happen. I think back to when I was a kid in Gwinnett County and first came to Fernbank Forest and thought, wow, it's odd that you have to protect a place that's simply the woods, that's the trees the way that they're supposed to be. Because where I grew up, there were plenty of forests. But now we have a spot that's been undisturbed for longer than Fernbank Forest, that's larger and in a better natural balance. And it provides the last refuge in our area for school children to visit and see just how nature is supposed to function. So despite the rapacious tentacles of the developer class and the hungry outreach of a municipal government seeking unearned revenue, the facts don't change. It should be obvious to anyone viewing this objectively that the Ashford Park Old Growth Forest is already at its highest and best use and doing what only a climax forest can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. I'm going to move forward now with Lisa Bartlett. She's going to talk why green space is important. Lisa?
Hi, thanks you guys for coming out. I've lived in Chamblee for close to 30 years. I'm a horticulturist and a garden designer. Do you know when the best time to plant a tree is? 25 years ago. That's how long it takes a tree to reach a fraction of its potential. Many of the trees in this forest are well over that, many dating back to pre-Civil War. And while I've never had the pleasure of seeing the Dawn Redwood Forest in California, I like knowing they exist. Even if you never set foot in this forest, isn't it nice to know that your city has a little bit of wildness still left in it? The plant and animal life are far more diverse than you might imagine. The habitat is a haven to all manner of birds, from the great horned owl, who needs the larger trees to nest in, to the pileated woodpecker, which is a giant bird, to the Cooper's hawk that has evolved to live in the forest. There's the eastern salamander, eastern turtles that are rare, and America's only marsupial, the opossum. Yes, there are raccoons and coyotes, but I'm more worried about man. I'm afraid of man worst of all of these animals. Man is a far greater threat than any of these much maligned animals are to us. And as far as the plant life, there are jack-in-the-pulpits, a really interesting and rare plant. There are trilliums that are so beautiful in and out of flower. And native gingers and ferns and native azaleas that are as big as dogwoods. There's even the big-leafed magnolia, a really prehistoric-looking tree. You just don't find this kind of diversity in the city anymore. Why? Because we're destroying every shred of habitat left to them. We condemn third world countries for destroying their forests. If we allow this habitat to be bulldozed for a housing development or anything else, that would make us no better. Wild areas shouldn't be a luxury, but a necessity. Let's be honest, if trees gave off Wi-Fi, we'd all be planting them. Isn't it a shame they only give off oxygen? And did I mention a walk in the woods is cheaper than therapy? Our city councilman should try it sometime. Only when the last tree has been felled and the last river has been poisoned and the last fish has been caught will we realize we can't eat money. We need to take care of the land because, let's face it, one day we're all going to be a part of it. There was a famous environmentalist by the name of the Lorax that was once asked, "Which way does a tree fall?" His reply, "It falls the way it leans." Be careful which way you lean, people.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll take and mix our agenda up a little bit, and at this point we I'd like to call our Mayor of Brookhaven, J. Max Davis, to make a statement, if you wish. Got about 5 minutes in here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for having this gathering. Yates, the Yateses and Miss Kidd, this is the kind of thing I love about Brookhaven, when people can come speak their mind and nobody's going to jump on you. Maybe y'all jump on me, but I just wanted to say I've known about this area for all my life because I'm a Brookhaven native. I went to Chamblee High School and grew up on West Nancy Creek. And I grew up on West Nancy Creek with about 30 acres behind me, similar to the size of this, where I was able to roam as a child. And I think this piece of property is very valuable. And if this property gets transferred to the city of Brookhaven, unfettered, free of charge as passive green space, I see no reason whatsoever for us to do anything other than keep it the way it is. And I just hope that can be a reality. And that's going to take some work with the county, I know. But I'd like to hear from you all a little bit later if there are any other ideas or plans, or if that's a reality. I know what you were saying, Ms. Kidd, about it being, you know, our grandparents, my mom and dad paid for this. We all did. I hope that, I know with Commissioner Rader, I've spoken about the unspent bond money that we have for this area. He's mentioned trying to get that for Brookhaven. Maybe we can do some kind of deal there. But the city has no plans for this property because we don't own the property. And if we get this property without any stipulations, free of charge, maybe we can even pay something for it. I know we can't pay the market rate, but I think it'd be a big mistake to do anything other than keep it as it is and make it an asset like you talked about, Eddie, for school children. I think that's a great, I've got 10, 5, and 8-year-old myself. I would like to just take exception to one thing that was said tonight. This redevelopment powers referendum, I'm not really hot about redevelopment powers either way. It's not something that I was insisting on. But I don't see a connection. I know they're not meant to do anything with what Ms. Bernard had said earlier. There was a little bit of misinformation there. You can go to brookhavencitylimits.com. That's brookhavencitylimits.com to see a presentation by a redevelopment lawyer who presented on what TADs can do. But nobody's ever mentioned to me about anything about having condemnation powers as part of, or seizing property or raising taxes when it comes to redevelopment powers. So I just want to make sure, that seems like a red herring to me. I don't know why there's a connection between this property and TADs. You make up your own mind about what the redevelopment powers law is. But again, I want to thank you all for having this. This is a great area. I'm dressed this way tonight because I just came from a walk in Ashford Park with 10 citizens and I. Walked and they discussed issues about on Caldwell Road and Dresden, all around Green Meadows, and it's a great thing that I've been doing because I really get to see people on their terms, and they can address concerns they have. And I'd love to come walk this green space, like Ms. Kidd had said earlier, and hear and see some of the things that you have in the pictures. That's very interesting to me. I'd love to bring my kids along as well. So I'll be doing these community walks for. It's good for me to get me in shape, and it's good for y'all to get engagement with your elected officials. I'd love to come to your neighborhood or come to this area and walk with you. So check if your neighborhood has a Facebook page, let me know, and I'll try and say where I'll be, and y'all can kind of poke me to let me know where you want me to come walk. And I appreciate, again, all of you coming out. I'll be here afterwards if y'all have any questions for me. But again, I appreciate what y'all doing, bringing this light to this very important issue. And I hope it does stay the way it has for thousands of years. So it's a great thing you're trying to promote here.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. Next on our agenda, we have an opportunity for our neighbors to make remarks, and we're going to take this opportunity for the folks that are candidates for our city council. We're going to allow them to speak to us, and we're going to hold you guys down to 3 minutes each. And the first on my list here, how many council candidates do we have? 3? Okay. In alphabetical order, please approach the podium. We'll give you 3 minutes each.
Hey, good evening. My name is Charles Berry. I'm running for City Council District 2. I'm very impressed with the turnout here tonight and the passion that I'm seeing from everybody about the green space. I went out there walking yesterday, and it is beautiful. I kind of got lost for a little bit. I might need an actual tour guide because I didn't even know where I came out the wrong end, had to go back in. It was a little bit of a mess, but I really do appreciate the passion when it comes to that green space. And I think presented with the issue of how to keep it, I think we've got to kind of understand what the procedures to follow are. From what I'm hearing, it seems that we own the land. It's been paid for. If it's paid for, then there shouldn't be a market price. That's news to me. I didn't know that. I learned that today. That's why I came. I want to be educated about that. But so we got to understand how do we go about doing this? And I mean, that would probably be the next order of business. I don't know the answers to those questions, but thank you guys for inviting me. Have a nice night.
Hi there, my name is Tim Nama. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I took a tour of this green space with Mr. Yates and Mr. Murray a few weeks back, and it was great getting to walk through there and see the old growth forest like Eddie talked about tonight. This is an asset that needs to be preserved for everyone. We're going to have to work within the parameters that we have in order to save it, but I think that Mr. Rader gave us he gave us some great insight into some different ways that we can possibly save that. If we do have to pay highest and best market rate for the property, he mentioned that there was a possibility that DeKalb could use federal green space money to take transfer of the property from someone other than DeKalb. Well, if you get an appraisal on the property for $3 million, let the city of Brookhaven buy the property for 10 days and have DeKalb County use federal green space money to buy it back. Then we're using federal green space money to save the property, and it didn't come out of anybody's pocket. It's already there. There's a reasonable solution that we can find for this, and there's enough people in this room that have enough passion about it that we can all come up with that together. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is John Park. I live on 2997 Skyline Drive Northeast. That was my citizen speech, not my candidate speech. Tim, great idea. There are a lot of great ideas out there. I outlined them in my open letter to the city and to the county. One thing I do want to stress is that whatever decision that we make, whatever approach that we take, it is an approach that it has complete community involvement and has completely transparent, because it is community land, it belongs to all of us. And I want to stress that it should have community involvement. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all three of our candidates. Remember what they said when you vote. Next on our agenda, we're taking names where people filled out cards to make comment. Lisa, we're going to run our microphone around. The first name that I have here is Michael Lennon. And Michael, if you take the mic, and I believe we're going to increase the 1 minute because we've been so efficient and everybody's been so well behaved that we'll increase it to 3 minutes. So.
My name is Mike Lennon. I'm on 1802 Toby Road. I border the property that's in question. Like Deborah, I had nominated that property as green space back in 2003 and was politely told by the county that they wouldn't even consider it since it was airport property. But I did find out that when looking at properties for green space, they had 9 criteria. And if you met enough of the criteria, you were categorized higher. This property is category 1 as highly desirable because it met 8 of the 9 criteria fully, and the 9th criteria it met partially. So it would have been a perfect green space candidate had it not been airport property. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. The next card that was filled out was from Matt Bell. Matt, would you like to speak? Up here, Lisa.
My only suggestion, and you know, I live across the street, I live on Skyline Drive, was if we wanted to have a little bit more community involvement in here and a way of kind of maintaining the land a little bit, was to consider putting in a disc golf course. It's an idea. It would keep the land still very forested, and there's enough land there to make a nice one, and it would get a lot of people coming through there. So that was my primary suggestion.
Matt, bring the Frisbee. I'll show you how to lay it out. Okay, next on the list is Charles. No, that's a question. Okay, we'll get with Charles Folsom's question at the question point. Next card is from Ronnie Mayer. Ronnie Mayer?
I love this crowd here tonight. This is passion. This is passion. I love it. We had a meeting the other day with the CEO of the county there, a Brookhaven meeting. There were 3 people there. 3 people. That's sad. But this I like. This is passion. Brookhaven has other parks too. We're in Georgian Hills Park. That's been our fight for years. But I love this. This is just a great sign of what Asher Park is passion. But just remember that you have Georgian Hills Park that needs all your help too. But just remember that word, passion, because it will get you somewhere in this county and this city. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie, for your comments. We're way ahead of time, I think. Our efficiencies are just too great, I think. Before we go any further, I think what we said here is we're going to just go ahead and open up with Charles Folsom asking a question, and we're going to go into a free format. I'm sorry, did somebody have a comment? Charles?
Yeah, I guess my question is, full disclosure, 1858 Toby, we're actually going to tear the house down that's there in a couple of weeks and rebuild, so a lot of skin in this particular game, and I don't think there's anyone here who disagrees with the fact that we want this to be green space. I think there's been a lot of time and effort, and thank you guys for putting in all the time and effort into explaining why we need it and things like that, but people wouldn't be here if they didn't want it to be green space. So I think my question is, I know there's been a lot of talk about how it could be a free transfer or things like that, but that's not the way the law was written, and it does require the airport to get paid. And just because the county and the airport are sort of the same thing, they are different entities. So my question is, as much as I want to keep this green space, how do you guys propose that we can do that and fulfill that payment obligation at the same time?
Okay, Charles, thank you for your question. I've worked in real estate for a long time, and the one thing I do know is that you can't sell property to yourself. So the only thing I really know is that for property to change hands, DeKalb County can't sell property to itself. So for the property to go from being managed by an agency of the DeKalb County government, the airport, to another agency of DeKalb County, say a parks department, no money has to change hands because it's the same thing. Like I can't sell my house to me. We have some other answers if you'd like a better one. I'm sure Deborah or somebody, Charles, would you like to us address? Okay. Deborah, can you speak to this? Because it's kind of if anybody's not interested, I guess we can.
I'll try to keep it brief. Many of us that have worked on this have spent a fair amount of time talking to the FAA with these questions. The federal obligations that attach to airport property have a lot of different requirements, and Charlie's right. If the property is sold, all of the proceeds from the sale of the property go strictly to Peachtree DeKalb Airport by federal law. And it would be used strictly for projects that are FAA sanctioned, primarily airport expansion and airport improvements. Be a pretty considerable windfall for the airport at this point. But the FAA has told us, since there are no grants, there's no federal money attached to that particular parcel of former airport property, the FAA does not consider that that DeKalb County has to sell it. They are comfortable with the land remaining in DeKalb County's ownership. They are comfortable with it staying as green space. They consider green space to be a good land use, particularly adjacent to a neighborhood. So if there's no sale, there's no requirement to reimburse Peachtree DeKalb Airport for it. Peachtree DeKalb Airport, again, is a management organization that belongs to DeKalb County. The subject of fair market value, like Eddie mentioned, comes up all the time. A lot of people like to use that as a target of saying that the maximum amount of money that could be procured for that from a sale is what the highest and best value is. Well, even the FAA has instances in their history, in recent history, where communities have wanted green space or other things, and because of the community's input, highest and best value does not always mean money. There's no obligation to sell the land or pay that money to Peachtree DeKalb Airport. That's kind of the short answer. Sir?
I met this morning with Mike Van Wee. I am Art Freeman with the Chambly Chamber of Commerce to get clarity on this particular point. I'm a resident of Brookhaven, and I'm speaking as a resident of Brookhaven, not as the chamber, excuse me. The county has mandated to the airport to act as an agent on their behalf in order to put that land up for sale. The land can only be put up for sale through the county's RFP proposal process. By that, it means it has to be published and it has to get sealed bids, and then the highest of the sealed bids is the recipient. The funds are going to the county. They are not going to the airport authority, nor to the FAA, because that is no longer of interest, as she has said, to the FAA. The use of the land, however, is of interest to the county. There are covenants and there are restrictions on the deed title for that land that pretty much preclude it from actually being used for a residential project. That's why it sat so long and has not been utilized. There are noise restrictions. There are restrictions on the type of lighting you can have on the properties. There are glare restrictions. Those are still considered relevant by the FAA because there is what is called a navigational bubble that sits on top, even though it's no longer designated as a safety zone. So the only practical use of this land is green space. But my gut is that it'll have to be done through some type of RFP process for us to obtain it.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Deborah, for answering. If anybody would care to see the actual deeds where DeKalb County purchased this property, there's no mention of any covenants. It was fee simple transfer from private ownership into DeKalb County. To two tracts were bought for the large piece of the property in 1941 and the smaller piece of the property in 1952. So the purchases were in 1941 and in 1942 were in fee simple, which means total ownership is with the DeKalb County government. There were no restrictions, there were no easements, none of the sticks of the bundle of rights were withheld. Anybody got any questions about that? If you want to see the deeds, I can show them to you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Ken.
I'm Mike with Mike. I'm Mike Madison. I live at 2973 Skyland. I border the other side of the far side of the green space. I've heard it said a couple times tonight that either the county isn't comfortable with maintaining ownership or the county is under pressure to sell the land or dispose of the land in some way. And I'm just curious if anybody can provide any clarification or any background onto where that pressure is coming from or why that comfort level with maintaining the property or keeping the property within DeKalb County, where that fear, for lack of a better word, is coming from. I'm not sure if Commissioner Rader can speak to that if he's still here or anyone else.
I mean, the problem is if you can do it now, you need to do it now. Because in 5 years, how much is the land going to be worth? Or who's going to be in charge at the county in 5 years? Are we going to love them? We're going to hate them? I think we got a relationship now that's pretty decent. So if we need to handle this, we need to handle it now and get it over with. Thank you.
Did y'all want to address any of these issues? About what? Go ahead, Larry. You can make a quick.
I guess. Oh, okay.
Got another question on the card? Okay. All right. Okay, I've got one on a card from Esther Graff Radford.
Perfect. I have lived within walking distance of the green space for 11 years now, and I absolutely passionately support this effort. I think it's doing its best and highest use, even if I never set foot on it the way it is right now. But I'm wondering, do neighbors have access to the space now in general? Because I never knew that I could stroll onto it, enjoy it, use it, bring my children there. Can we use it now? And if not, what's the plan if we preserve it? Is there a plan for creating wider access to the green space if you don't live adjacent to it?
Okay. So one of the property is bounded by I guess you could say 3 access points. They're natural access points. One of them you can see from Claremont. It's where it's got a bunch of trash and equipment that the city is storing equipment for maintenance right here on the front. That's a gate that goes into the property. Walking access can be right through here. You can also access it off of Skyland Drive right in here. There's a path. And if you follow the end of Park Lane, it has a path that goes in there. And if you'd like, you just ask me and I'll give you a tour of the property. Okay, who am I forgetting next?
We have one more question.
Go ahead.
My wife and I live over on Trentwood Place, and I just really agreed with your point. And obviously coming here, I supported this before I even walked in the door, and it's been so well said and compelling, and I feel way more informed. I guess what I was just wondering, and forgive my ignorance, I just probably don't know, what tangibly, practically should we do, can we do, to actually make this happen? Is there anyone in the room who has the decision-making power? I've heard several speak, and they're like, well, it doesn't belong to us, or it's not, the mayor, it's not his responsibility. Is that what he's about to talk about?
Yeah, Larry's going to address that. But
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump the gun.
he'll address that toward the end of the meeting. Briefly, what we know about land disposal of bulk lands, it's in the hands of the county commission, okay? They have a procedure that they use for disposal of bulk lands. So the commissioners, if you want to take action, it's primarily your representation in DeKalb County government. The people that are supposed to do what you want them to do have to do the right thing. So we're going to listen to Larry Foster in a little bit, and he's going to address that pretty rigorously, I hope. Okay, now, we have a comment? Go ahead.
I'm Luther McKinnon. I used to live on Toby Road, and I presently live on Park Ridge Drive. You may have already answered this, but my question is, why do we need to have a transfer? Why couldn't we just leave the property in the present ownership and just draw up some kind of legal agreement to keep it as a green space?
I think that's a wonderful question. I'd like to address it briefly unless somebody else wants to talk about the concept of a conservation easement. It's not that I distrust my governments. It's just that this idea that when you take the development rights away from the government, they can no longer develop the property in the future. If you don't protect the property with some type of conservation easement, at any moment, they could say, we need another competition for Walmart. Let's put in a Target. So, yeah. Does anybody else want to address how we can protect the property? Anybody in our group? Go ahead, Larry.
It's just that if we do need to get it nailed down, and this is sort of like a love fest here, but there's a lot of other stuff going on behind the scenes, and we have had a variety of people, including developers, who would like to pay more than $30 million for the land to do something with it. We do need to get it nailed down. It needs to be a permanent conservation easement, or through, Deborah knows more about this than I do, about if it's put into permanent passive green space, I guess that works somewhat like a permanent conservation easement. But Deborah is the real authority on, or some of the other people here have done a lot more. I'm an interloper from 10 minutes away in the Hawthorne School District, PDK Watch. But, yeah.
Thank you, Larry. As the discussion continues, I think it's really important we're getting the right questions asked. What can we do? Does anybody have any other discussion that you'd like, questions answered by our group, or questions that we can help? J. Max, can you?
I was wondering if anybody had researched, I'm sure there have been airports all across the country that have closed or have closed runways, and there's been property and crash zones. Has anybody researched what has happened in the past to those situations?
Anybody in the group want to field that? William?
I'm William Murray. I'm with the Alliance also. And I've done some research on this, and it varies considerably based on what the jurisdiction is and what the ownership of it is. And so private ownership is, of course, different than it is when it is owned by the jurisdiction itself. So I've looked for specific ones where there was one jurisdiction within another jurisdiction, as we have here in Brookhaven, and so far I have not seen a case that is specifically applies.
Can take the federal issue away, then it becomes a lot more local and easy for us to deal with, because then we have people who are accountable to the voters to make the decisions, not a federal agency. So.
I agree, but so far the FAA has told us that they would not be against using it as a green space. So we don't know that, we don't have any impetus from them that it has to be sold. That's what they've told us.
Do I have to stand up? Okay. Hi, I'm Amy. I live on Toby Road. And my question to you guys, since you seem informed, and I may be sounding ignorant here, but my family works in oil and gas, and they're constantly complaining about conservation groups not letting them drill in places. And is there any conservation groups that are big enough that can join in, or have you tried to find groups? Or like one of the times this happened, there was like a endangered species on the property and they couldn't drill. I mean, is anything along those lines that can help the fight? Sorry.
We searched for red-cockaded woodpeckers. We searched for endangered salamanders. We have contacted groups like the Trust for Public Lands, and all of these are still options. If somebody has a salamander in their pocket, I would welcome you to just walk about a half a mile up the street and let him go. So the answer is we have our work cut out for us to try to protect this green space in a permanent fashion in the long term. In the near term, we can keep the bulldozers off of it until we can protect it permanently. We would love to see a conservation easement held by another group like the Trust for Public Lands. Would be a wonderful solution for this. But unless we can find some real pressing issue, they have other properties they're trying to protect. Yeah, we've been looking, and we welcome any help that we can. We've got a question down here.
I'd like to clarify the point that Max brought up about the FAA involvement. We are not talking about the FAA involvement with the land. The FAA involvement is the airspace above the land. They have a chart that shows what altitudes and what distances you can have if a plane goes 3 to 8 degrees off of its landing approach, and what impact that will have in the structure or what on the ground in that particular area. The FAA has total, complete control over the air rights. And when you mentioned that there was no covenants or things that went along with the title, you are still restricted by the airspace that is above the land, and there's no way to disengage the FAA from that.
That's correct. If you were to put up a radio tower that's 300 feet on your property, you have to get the FAA to approve that. So that's pretty important to know.
My name is Tom Hogan. I live up in the Chamblee portion of Ashford Park. I'm going to make a college try at trying to tell you what I think the situation is here, and I welcome anybody to kind of set me right. The property is owned by DeKalb County. It's under the authority of the airport, which is a department of DeKalb County. It's not a separate entity. The airport is run and owned by the county. The property is actually being kind of handcuffed because the FAA's rules about when they give grants and other benefits to a municipal airport is that they actually get the say over the use of any of the assets that the airport has. That's the involvement of the FAA. The point was made earlier that some conversation has been had with the FAA, and where the county would like to change the use of this property, all they would have to do is to get the FAA's approval, and that seems to be like it's a possibility. In the case on the other side of the airport, where the dog pound was located, the county, in terms of satisfying the FAA, transferred a couple of $1 million from the county's general fund over into the airport fund as a way of solving or satisfying the FAA's need for the asset to be being given some fair market value for its transfer of use from being an aviation-related use to being a non-aviation-related use. So what I am hoping that I'm hearing is that there's really a matter of trying to understand then the consternation of this space now being in the jurisdiction of the city of Brookhaven, and the complications of where does the funding come from in order to be able to make the FAA happy. If in fact the FAA needs to be made happy, if they have no requirements, then it's a moot point. But assuming that they do have a fair market value restriction, which I think Mike has actually told me that they do, then it would be a matter of where the funds come from. And I have a hard time understanding that if you have a base of 750,000 taxpayers, that those funds would come from a smaller jurisdiction for the purpose of being able to convey public lands and keeping them green. It seems to me that it would be very simple just for the general fund still, even though this property is in the city of Brookhaven, it seems to me it would make sense for that property to still be conveyed over and into the city of Brookhaven at the general fund's expense, because we are all DeKalb County residents. You know, we all pay DeKalb County taxes. The money that the county would use in order to be able to convey this property is our money. Just because we live in cities doesn't mean that we don't live in DeKalb County. And so I think that one of the things that I heard Commissioner Rader say is that one of the pieces that's not being talked about that they're really interested in is getting a much broader conversation about the actual use of this property. The county itself has a strategic mission in order to be able to convey health services and other services to all citizens. And while this is a tremendously valuable piece of green space, it's also a piece of real estate that the county needs to contemplate its use and how it is that it services all of its citizens. So I would just say that it seems to me that the best result from this meeting that I've gotten is to engage Commissioner Rader and the other commissioners to try to understand a little bit more broadly also with the passion of wanting to have something green there, but understanding what the total strategy for the county is on the north side of DeKalb County to make sure that we understand that if there is a health department need or if there is a tag office need, that those things can be resolved and mitigated in order to be able to make way for this to be kept as green space. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I'd like to also address the fact that I didn't cover this because I was trying to leave more time for comments. In the history of the Peachtree DeKalb Airport, it has a long history. It goes back to where federal monies were used to purchase properties. As a matter of fact, the property you're talking about, back when it was a Naval Air Station in Atlanta, they used federal funds to buy that pieces of property in the north and some in the east. But DeKalb County already owned the airstrip when World War II started ramping up. The restrictions on federally purchased properties have a different smell than the ones that are DeKalb properties. So I think that what we have as a group is probably some land law issues that are going on. That FAA can't really, once they release the property, they can't really tell you what to do with it. If they don't have anything to do with it, then it falls back to the county to say. Nobody owes nobody nothing. And that's the point I think we need to say as citizens is there's no debt on that property. There's no obligation to the FAA. There's no obligation to the airport. DeKalb County bought it in 1941 and 1952, and they paid for it. There's no money that has to change hands. The deeds were from, let's see, in 1941 between Dora Wiener and DeKalb County, and then does a legal description. Nothing in there.
There's one other problem. Whenever you have something really nice, and the nicer it gets, you invite criminal activity. Do we have a plan for the neighbors to help with security? Just for instance, if my next door neighbor that was here wants to go with her kids next week without one of y'all and just goes out there, what do we have in plan? Like I say, whenever you have something nice, and the nicer it gets and everybody knows about it, the first criminal walks back there and goes, wow, I can get to the backyards of all these houses and rob them and come right back out this way. Do we have anything in place as the neighborhood group that handles that now? Like my buddy, Mr. Mike Lennon, he knows that area a lot better than I do. I know the other part of Astor Park, that is his forte over there. But do y'all have a group that either walks it once a week, or do you tell everybody, walk back there, be careful, because I don't want and her 3 kids just to walk back there nonchalantly and go, ruh-roh, here's the criminal activity, because you see what just happened at Silver Comet Trail.
Yeah.
And this girl was on her bicycle in broad daylight.
Right.
And I just would hate, it would kill me if something happened to somebody. Thank you.
I think that's a good point, but it's a little bit down the path. I usually carry a machete when I'm back there clearing the paths out. And if somebody wants to confront me, or if you'd like me to protect you, I have another machete that you can carry. But as far as getting back onto what we're trying to say is, if we have the property designated as green space, and then have to worry about carrying the machetes, I think is the goal.
Ken,
Go ahead.
Not sure if you remember me. Corey Self, I live over on South Bambi Lane. Came and walked the green space with you a couple weeks ago as well. I appreciated that machete, particularly when I saw the beds back there from the vagrants that do live back there. My question isn't really down that line. My question is more in line with what Esther asked earlier tonight as far as public access to the land. My understanding is, you've pointed out the 3 access points. At least one of those had a sign, may still have the sign, saying no trespassing, do not enter, something to that effect. I know you mentioned when we walked the green space that day that you had pulled down some of those signs previously. Well, I think you said you had pulled that one down, or you thought that had been pulled down, whatever the case may be. I'm curious, do we actually have the right to go in and walk the land? Do the signs mean anything if they are still up?
To answer the question, the last official word I got from Doc Manger, the airport manager, was, I don't care what you do back there, just don't get hurt. The way I understand it, the citizens have been using that for community gardens and playing in the woods since the 1950s. And when Doc Manger said that, to me, it basically said, I better not, get hurt. I mean, that's the way I left it. I never had an official word that said we're going to prosecute you for walking on land in DeKalb County that you already own. But we're getting off topic. I think we need to get back onto the focus here, which is saving the green space. And we need to kind of close out. I saw one more hand I'd like to take, and then we can go into our closing.
If your citizens have been using that as a garden, openly, continuously, notoriously, without interruption since 1950, you have a prescriptive easement on the property. You don't need to do anything. Go file your easement and disrupt the sale.
I'd love to agree with you, but you can't adversely possess against the government. It's really tough. I agree with you 100%. In closing now, I'd like to turn the mic over to Larry Foster to make his final appeal. I don't think there's too many people that we need to appeal to, but Larry?
Well, but then when you try to get it done, people always find a reason why it can't be done, even if it's not a real reason. I'm Larry Foster. I'm the communication director for PDK Watch, which is a citizen action group that has been active in various names for at least 30 years now, that tries to help protect both the quality of life and property values in long-established residential neighborhoods near PDK Airport from potentially damaging airport noise, pollution, and expansion. I just want to try to emphasize a couple of key points, get back to the main point. First, I want to just say how proud I am of the North DeKalb Greenspace Alliance. I got into this a bit late this summer, and they already had 500 signatures on a petition to save this as a permanent passive green space. That was wonderful. Now we have 800, more than 800 at the latest count. But that's not going to be enough to save it as permanent passive green space. I'll get to the action item at the end here. I also want to stress that if this is not preserved fairly promptly as permanent passive green space with an easement or with something else like that, somebody is going to start fiddling with the land and trying to get hold of it because it's potentially quite valuable. And since some people see only dollar signs and not much else before their eyes, it has to be encumbered so it can't happen, particularly before it's transferred, I think, to Brookhaven. If it's put in a permanent easement before it's transferred to Brookhaven, then it's going to be kept that way. But we don't have any guarantees of it otherwise. Okay, and then there's absolutely no charges that will be responsible for from the FAA if it is kept in its present state as permanent passive green space. If it is sold or developed in any way, including parks or something else perhaps, a more official thing, then all of that money, quite a lot of money probably, goes directly back to the Airport Improvement Fund. It does not go either to Brookhaven or to DeKalb County generally. It goes into and it provides a great impetus for further expansion of the airport and so forth. So I think we need to nail this down, and the only way I think that we can nail this down is to carry this beyond just signing the petition. 800 people is wonderful, but it hasn't quite gotten through to some of the commissioners, I don't think, how important this is to us. And so I prepared a two-sided document, which you should pick up on the way out of here, that highlights a number of the key issues and gives you some very specific things that need to be done. The most important thing that needs to be done, I think, is to write your commissioners, as many of you as can, a brief, polite, and courteous letter, but stressing the importance, if you feel that it's important, to preserve this as green space, asking them to make it happen, not just to talk about it. There are all sorts of cases where people say what can't be done. You know, they say, I'm in favor of it, but there's this problem. Well, usually the problem isn't really there, but they're not really on your side. They're pretending that they're on your side, and they're trying to find a way to sort of confuse you and derail you. So this is why the importance of keeping the pressure on to put permanent passive easement or a permanent passive green space in this area. And I've included the email addresses for both Jeff Rader and Kathy Gannon. I think probably wouldn't hurt to include some other people. We'll get that out as well. I just did this today on the fly, so to speak. But each of you, if you care about keeping this as green space, you need to let the commissioners know, and you need to do it now, not 2 weeks, a month, a year from now, when they've already decided to do something else with the land behind closed doors, and then it's too late to stop it. So we've tried repeatedly to get some of these areas put in permanent passive green space, and they're always finding excuses. They need to know. I know from experience from PDK Watch, when they get 400 or 500 letters, emails from constituents, they notice and they usually do something about it. Ultimately, PDK Watch has won almost every major battle except the very first one, which was a Pyrrhic victory in the 1986 court case that allowed them to expand the runway by 1,000 feet because they promised they would never bring any larger planes in than 66,000-pound planes. Well, that's not happening, is it? But they've been afraid of a lawsuit ever since then. So we did manage to sort of slow them down and keep them from getting completely out of control. But please pick up this two-sided handout. If you have any questions, my email's on there. I'll be happy to send you other information. And write your commissioner just a short note expressing your concern that they take action to ensure that this area remains permanent passive green space. It's a wonderful resource. It may not have been fully appreciated by everybody who lives here, but many of you obviously have appreciated it. And I think it would be terrible if it were lost. And it's going to have to come, however, from a grassroots number of people letting the commissioners, both especially Gannon and Rader, know that you are concerned about this. That's the bottom line. If you don't do that, 800 signatures, 900 signatures, you can have any number of signatures, but they've got to actually start realizing that people care about this and are going to be after them to do something about it, or they won't do it. That's just, I think that's the way it amounts to usually. Okay, yes, uh-huh. Well, just here's the basic. I understand, but you don't want it too much of a form letter. Just simply, the thing that I'm giving you has enough information that you can take parts of it. What you want to say about it, and say, you know, this is in my. Right. I take your point, and I will try to do that when I send it out to the PDK Watch folks, and we'll try to do some other things with that.
I was simply saying that to motivate 800 people, you got to make it easy to do the action. So, you know, I understand you don't want to flood the same. I can see your point about not sending the same letter 800 times, but all of us in here, we're here on Thursday night. We probably will take a letter. Okay. But you have 750 other people that, yeah.
Okay. Use the mic.
Yep. I just wrote another letter a week ago for PDK Watch on a different topic about having the right to appeal. The county is putting in a new zoning code, and the one thing that they're not putting in is they're cutting back on the right to appeal, so that presently the county commissioners and some other county officials can appeal zoning decisions. We wrote a letter in that appeal, sort of a draft letter with 3 points they could use. We'll try to do something like that if we can. It's a very good point, but at least if you can do it with what I've got, be sure to pick up the stuff as you go out and take a look at it. If you need other things, I can send you other things. I can send you a dummy letter, but basically you don't need a lot. You just need to say who you are, where you're from, what you care about, what you're asking them to do, and it doesn't have to be more than a paragraph, but they notice it if they get a number of emails. We've gotten 400 and 500 letters from our efforts.
May I ask a question, please?
There was
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh, hang on just a second. There was somebody that had their hand up before you over here. Lisa, if you can just.
Do you know if this matter is going to be taken up with the Planning Commission, the DeKalb County Planning Commission? Is that on the docket? Can it be brought up to the Planning Commission? Would that?
We are not aware of that at this point. What I would direct us to, this group, this community group, has set up a website. We have a web presence. It's called apgreenspace.info. apgreenspace.info for Ashford Park Greenspace.info.
It's on the agenda. It's got,
if we could put a, we'll put a, try to put a boilerplate letter up there for email. Yes, sir, go ahead.
I was just going to, I don't know, would it be beneficial either as a community or as some other official entity to get an expert in this particular kind of law to clarify? There's been so many different reports, and I'm not questioning any of them, but I've just sitting here, I've heard this version and then that version and this version, and maybe it's these people and maybe it's those. And would it be beneficial for us as a community, even if we had to fund it, to say someone who's a expert to then bring that testimony and that expertise to our commissioner and say, here's where we've identified exactly the issue is.
I understand that legal counsel is something that this group would probably need. J. Max, I'm going to have to cut it off with one more. Deborah, do you need to take the mic?
Let Deborah speak. Deborah can answer this, I think.
We've been searching for that exact kind of advice. So if anyone knows someone who has that area of expertise, please tell them that we'd love to talk to them. That would be a very valuable asset. We've been looking for that type of input. So we'll put out the word. We've tried. We've got another question? Come up here if you want. There- We don't need the FAA. We don't need the FAA. They've stepped out of this. I can give you the guy's phone number.
I would say that if we heard from the chairman or the director of the FAA, that would be concrete. But it just to release some of the uncertainty about this whole process, I think it's a good idea to have expert attorneys look at this issue directly.
I'm totally in favor of that. But part of the reason that it seems confusing is that very many entities, a lot of people, have tried to deliberately make it confusing. There've been a lot of barriers. There's been a lot of
Let's not deliberately do anything but get to the bottom of what we need to do.
Exactly, and that's what we're asking for.
Right.
There's been a lot of disinformation, and there've been a lot of different agendas. This is a very passionate topic for not only us who are trying to preserve the green space, but there are a lot of other entities who have their own agendas. And there's been a lot of disinformation, and I think that's part of what leads to it being confusing. And that's one of the things that we're saying. We want this to stop. We want transparency with our local government. We want clear information, and we want to find a solution to it. That's what we're asking. Thanks.
Final question. We have a final question?
I don't know if this is going to be a question, more of a comment and an idea, since we're sitting around talking passionately about what we can do to keep. So we've got 800 petitions or 800 signatures on this petition. You're saying that that's not going to be enough. I mean, you're not giving me the confidence it's going to be enough, but at least you're giving us the honest truth. We've got tons of residents in Ashford Park, and one thing I know that we're pretty good at is throwing social events. What if we did some sort of fundraiser or some sort of event, called our friends in the media, had them show up, let everybody in Atlanta see how passionate we are about this, and PDK, DeKalb County may take a second look and say, okay, why don't we just leave this thing alone before we really start to piss off some people?
I think that's a wonderful idea. Thank you very much. I think that what we need to do is to direct the communication to the apgreenspace.org website, and I think there's a place for contact us on there. And without a doubt, if you fill out the contact us on apgreenspace.org, or .info rather, that we will get back in touch with you. And I think the social event is an excellent idea. We have run out of time, ladies and gentlemen. My closing statement basically has to do with we need to do the right thing and we need to do some action. We know that this property needs to be preserved. And I see a lot of people that are willing to help. I'd like to help too. Sign up on apgreenspace.org. Give us your contact information. I'll lead a hike if somebody wants to go on a hike. We'll talk to Van Wee about getting permission to do it if somebody's concerned that the airport will arrest us for walking on the property. If somebody wants to go out in the meadow and play with a Frisbee or have a social event, I don't see really what the problem might be. But I need to close.
And we don't need to make problems where there aren't problems, but we do need to realize that we need to get on our commissioners to settle this, and if we want it as permanent passive green space, we better act before somebody else gets another idea and works out an alternative behind closed doors.
Y'all can find more ways to mobilize the young families and the young couples in our neighborhood through social media, through social events, through very, very, very easy next steps. We can get a lot more than 800, but it's complicated and hard to find.
Right. I think. Okay, we'll put the boilerplate letter on apgreenspace.org so that you can pick it up, and all of the email addresses that you can send it to will be on that same website. We can blast it. We will blast out. Yeah. We'll go ahead and blast all that out. I'm going to have to close the meeting. Our time is up. We only reserve this facility until 9. Thank you all so much. Thank you for your passion. Give yourself a big hand.